Welcome to the Healing Center Conversations podcast, where we create space for conversations that heal. I'm your host, Dr. Byron McClure, a nationally certified school psychologist. I, along with our special guests, will give you insight to promote collective healing by putting people first. Through weekly conversations with educators, psychologists, and healers, we'll discuss ways to heal, thrive, and live your best life. This is the Healing Center Conversations podcast. Welcome to the Healing Center Conversations podcast, where we create space to heal. I'm your host, Dr. Byron McClure, and on today's show, we have a very special guest, my colleague, my good brother, Dr. Charles Barrett. What's going on, sir?
How you doing, Byron?
Doing well, doing well. Look, I'm going to quickly read a quick bio, but this is a man who needs no introduction. But for those of you who aren't familiar, you're going to get familiar. But Dr. Charles Barrett is a multifaceted artist who thinks deeply about the world and the myriad issues facing people through the lens of psychology, faith, and education. Whether as a psychologist, teacher, writer, or musician, his purpose remains the same: communicating and facilitating hope and wholeness. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Barrett.
Great to be here, brother. Good job. Congrats on this new venture. You're doing great work, so it's an honor to be here.
Thank you. And you say it's an honor to be here. I share this with you from time to time. You're probably sick of me saying it, but if you don't know, I'm going to say it again. I met you for the first time, and I think it was Chicago. It was one of the NASP conventions. I want to say Chicago or
it could have
Atlanta.
Been maybe even San Antonio.
San Antonio. That's what it was.
Okay,
San Antonio was my first one. Yes. Okay. It was Definitely. San Antonio, and I'm walking around. I'm really still relatively new to the field of school psychology. That was my first NASP convention, and I'm walking around. It's like, there's Dr. Proctor. I'm like, that's a legend. And then I turn a corner, and I walk into a room, and I'm like, yo, that's Charles Barrett. Like, that's him. And then, like, we talk. And he was like, who's this guy? Brother. Who's this kid?
Nah, man. I heard your name as well. I heard your name. I think at that time you were doing some work with LDC, or maybe just about to get on, but people knew who you were already as well.
Yeah, and what's interesting, so I ran into you, and then after that I met Mary Beth Klotz, I believe is her name.
Mary Beth,
Yeah, and I met her. We had a long conversation. She starts introducing me to all these different people. I'm like, I have no idea who these people are, but I'm talking, and it's great to meet you all. And she's like, so do you want to get involved? And I'm like, I'm ready. Like, whatever it is, just let me know. And a week or two later, I'm getting calls. I get an invite to apply through this want ad. I'm like, what is a want ad?
Yeah.
And it's for the Leadership Development Committee. And
Correct.
Through that's how my pathway to NASP kind of happened. But before all of that, I met the man, the myth, the legend. That is Charles Barrett.
You are kind, brother.
So Charles, for those who may not know you or who are getting familiar with the work, who is Dr. Charles Barrett?
Well, it's always Charles. You know that, brother. So Charles
Yeah. We got to put respect on your name first. But Charles, who is that. Charles?
Yeah, I'm a school psychologist. I'm in year 14. I say I'm a bona fide practitioner. So I practiced for 13 years, all 13 spent in elementary school, 9 in high school, 6 in middle school. Love it. I do some adjunct work at Howard, at Millersville, George Mason, in their school psych programs, but also I teach undergrads at a community college. I recently got to central office, something I thought I would never do, but now I'm a coordinator, diagnostic and psychological services, overseeing some psychs, and love the work that I do. But even in that role, I'm still seeing kids, still working with kids directly. So yeah, I'm a musician. I've been playing since I was 6, so 30 some odd years playing piano, trumpet. Grew up in church playing, many years. From New York, but I now live in Virginia, just outside of D.C., so suburban D.C. But yeah, that's me, school psychologist. Love what I do. I think I'll do this for the foreseeable future. whatever I'm doing, I always bring that lens of school psychology to what I'm doing. So great to be here again, Byron, and that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome, and a nutshell it is, and you are so many things to so many people. Like I said, you're someone who I looked up to, who I've read your research, your articles, your work, and so I know a lot of people respect and admire your work, and I'm one of those people. And so one thing I read where you had to make a decision at one point in your life between getting a degree in speech pathology or psychology. And I'm interested to hear how you landed, obviously, psychology. But what was the thinking behind that?
Sure. So, little backstory. It's something that I've been talking about a lot more, probably the last year or so. But I would say that I'm someone with a lifelong stutter. But in elementary school, it was a lot more significant. And at the time, I hated it. It was embarrassing. So in first grade through sixth grade, I went to speech therapy in school. And then by high school, I knew that I wanted to be, either a teacher or a speech pathologist to help kids like me. So I went to college, went to St. John's in New York, and started out as an English and speech major to either teach high school English or, again, be a speech pathologist. And really, the shift to psychology was about money. Like many students, money's an issue. So I got this scholarship opportunity to do research. And it was designed to encourage minoritized students to get into chemistry and biology to get these advanced degrees in research. So that was never my interest, not a big on, chemistry and bio and physics, but they also included psychology or sociology. So it was a great scholarship. It was a full ride, stipend, actually made money going to undergrad, paid for summer courses. So it was a great thing. Ended up working with a clinical child and school psychologist, a guy named Raymond D. Giuseppe up at St. John's. And at the end of undergrad, I'm still torn between, teaching or now child psychology. And he turned me on to school psych. And literally, I always say he changed my life in about 5 minutes. Kind of give me a quick overview of the field, think I'll like it. It's psychology, it's education. And that's how I landed here in school psych. So that was, that was 2001, and here I am now, all these years later, in the field.
And you are crushing it in the field. And so you're a practitioner, been in the field, do a lot of trainings. You're also an author as well. And shout out, whenever I do speaking engagements or talking to people, even in my day-to-day work when I was a practitioner, I would always say, it's always about the children.
Absolutely.
And I always give credit to you. So I'm interested to hear where this hashtag, this saying, this motto, this mantra came from. So speak on that for a little bit.
Interesting. So it really came very much organically. I would post about, my day in school psychology. This is probably 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. And I would just end with, because it's always about the children, just a short little phrase that I didn't think people even recognized or, saw. And then a former colleague, she was a psychologist, her name is Emily. Emily posted something maybe early 2018, and she included the hashtag, so it's about the children. And that was the first time that I saw that people really were paying attention to what I was saying about this hashtag. Fast forward a couple of months from there, this book was actually a summer project. I wanted to just write something at the time. I was in year 10 of practicing, and I wanted to give people a window into how I thought as a psychologist, kind of my core values, how I approach serving kids, serving families, the major things in school psychology that were important to me. So I literally just wrote the book over the summer. Came out in September, and it just took off from there. So that was 3 years ago now. Probably sold close to 5,000 copies. And it's been great. It's been definitely a great experience. Really simple read. It's just, there's one about, I think the heart of the book also came from a colleague, Tammy Hagley, I work with. She's one of my diagnosticians, and we talked about some things that were often not taught in school formally about how to connect to people, how to validate people's feelings before offering recommendations or ideas. So the heart of the book really came from chapter 2, which talks about these overlooked clinical skills that really make our jobs more effective. So people assume that you have the skill set, but do they trust you? Do they believe in you? Do they like you, essentially, to listen to what you have to say? So just a couple of things that I want to offer to people, not only school psychologists, it's teachers, it's administrators, it's principals. So yeah, really great. But it started just kind of organically, just sharing about my day. And then later on, probably 2019, I started Today in School Psychology, just again sharing some short stories, and I released volume 1 and volume 2 the last couple of years. So just some things about insight. Some are funny stories from kids that they just kind of say things, but also some insights, some lessons that I've kind of picked up on just being a school-based practitioner.
And Charles, what's fascinating to me about the series of books that you have, you've also self-published as well, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Not hard at all. Not hard at all.
Talk a little bit about that for our listeners.
Yeah, so this came from an idea. So I'm a big Oprah fan. So Oprah, if you're listening, I am ready to sit with you on Super Soul Sunday. That is one of my goals. And every chance I get, I mention being with Miss Winfrey on Super Soul Sunday. So if you're out there, Miss Winfrey, give Charles Barrett a call. I will be there whenever you need me to be. But I learned something from watching Oprah as a kid. And someone taught her the importance of owning yourself. And as I was a musician and now a writer, as much as possible, I wanted to have creative control, but also ownership of my product. So I just started kind of Googling some things and looking into it. Another school psych brother told me about the process, and it was really, really easy. So again, all these books I've done from start to finish has probably been no more than a few months. So it's really a simple process. I'm grateful I've done it. I do have some other things in the works now with other publishers, but it does feel good to have a product that, I have total control over creatively, not only the financial end of it, but just, to have ownership of what I've created and established. So easy process. Ownership. Email me. Yeah, definitely email, reach out. Love to walk you through the process, but it really is not as hard as people make it seem.
What I appreciate about it is the ownership component and the fact that you taught yourself how to do it and you did it.
Yes, sir.
That's empowerment to me. So I love that. So Charles, thinking back to, I want to go back to San Antonio, and when I met you, I want to say it was like the African American Subcommittee or MAC, or it was a meeting of us, right? And I remember it was talk about where we're headed in the field. And I'm interested to hear in your perspective from that time, which I believe was 2016. It had to be around that time frame.
Exactly right.
But you've been in the field since the early 2000s. How has the field evolved in terms of social justice, equity, from your perspective?
Yeah, great question. I think we've come a long way, but there's a long way to still go. So I went to grad school up at Lehigh, started in 2002, and didn't hear anything about social justice in school psychology. Counseling psych, I heard a little bit about it, but really thinking about systems and how systems affect children, affect families, affect schools, affect communities. That was pretty foreign to my training, and I think many people's training in school psychology. What I saw happening back in 2016, we had this kind of this wave of, not really a wave, but we had Flando Castile, we had Alton Sterling, 2 black men killed by police in the span of probably a few weeks or a few months. And NASP started some collaborative work with MAC and school safety and crisis response. How do we, support kids who may be, asking about these situations, be responsive, in their communities. And that's really how more formally social justice kind of became a thing in NASP, but also in school psychology. Of course, people like Sherry Proctor and Dave Schreiberg and others have been doing this for many, many years. But I felt that in 2016, there was a larger recognition of it, at least from a professional association. So we had the task force for about 2 years, 16 to 18, and put out a bunch of materials around privilege, around implicit bias, around intersectionality. And then in 2018, the Social Justice Committee was formed, which is now a long-standing entity within NASP structure. So I think those kind of early activities or early projects laid some good foundation for where we're going now. Again, still a long way to go. One of the goals of the committee is to really embed this social justice paradigm into all aspects of the profession. So it's in teaching, it's in assessment, it's in advocacy, it's in policy and practice, and not just this kind of this add-on that we put onto things after we've done whatever we want to do. So really just trying to change people's mindset and really embed that paradigm, that way of thinking into what they do for the field. That's kind of where we're going. Some programs have definitely adopted it, from years ago, but I think others of us are still kind of struggling with what it is, how do we grow in it. So it's exciting, certainly, again, long way to go, but I do think we're heading in the right direction in a lot of ways.
Charles, you are, along with some of the others that you mentioned, the Dave Schreibergs of the world, the Sherry Proctors of the world, and a handful of others, have really been carrying this work and shouldering the weight of it amongst yourselves. And so I'm interested to know, man, just as another brother in this work, like what motivates you to keep you going, especially with everything that's happening in Loudoun County? It's hard work.
It's
so
hard.
What keeps you going, my brother?
So I think a couple of things. I think a sense of calling and purpose really fuels me. So the things I do, be it the writing, the speaking, being a practitioner, being an administrator, it's a lot, but it rarely feels like work because I really feel that what I'm doing is so aligned to who I am as a person. So when things kind of just flow out of you naturally, that does help. So doing school psychology is not difficult because I really feel that this is where I should be doing what I'm doing with the people I'm working for and the people that I'm serving. Second to that, certainly it's about helping kids. So if it's one-on-one with a kid or one-on-one with a family or a teacher, that's helping. If it's helping other adults, be more informed in their practice, that's also ultimately helping children. So I really believe that whatever we do, if it's good for kids, we're doing the right work. But broader than that, it really is about a sense of calling, a sense of purpose and passion. And school psych, for me, has been a vehicle to do that. I say broadly, more than being a psychologist or anything else, I'm really about hope and wholeness. I want people to feel, whole, to have hope that things are getting better or things can get better. It takes work, takes time, but I try to communicate that in all that I do. Want people to be whole, want them to have hope. And again, school psych has been one vehicle for me to do that.
So the platform is Healing Centered Conversations, right? And my father was a minister. I'm not sure if you knew
mine
that
is too, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so coming from a spiritual background, a spiritual component, I'm interested to hear if that's where your understanding of hope and wholeness kind of comes from. Absolutely. And then you're merging and blending that with psychology. I'm interested to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I think of whole, I don't think of perfection. I think of having all the parts or being complete. So people make mistakes, and that's just part of being human. But in the midst of our imperfections, we can still be whole in this process. So, for example, I do believe that some people have legitimate disability. And that can be a hard thing to accept as a child, as an adolescent. I learn differently, or I have these emotional difficulties or mental health difficulties. It's hard for parents, too, to hear words like autism and other disabilities. So my job is, as a psychologist, is how can I facilitate some greater understanding, greater acceptance that this does not negate who you are as a person or lessen your value, but really kind of help reframe that this is part of who I am, and we can work through all of these limitations to get to where we are. Certainly my, lifelong stutter has been really helpful in seeing kids who stutter, seeing families who may have speech impediments. It gives me some perspective that you can still get to where you want to be in spite of these limitations. So that's been helpful for me, but I also talk about just kind of broadly this idea of the gospel being for everybody, especially the least of these among us. And the least of these are what are people that systems have made that way. So the poor, those who are disenfranchised, those who are lonely, those who are in prison, people have placed them in those positions. So again, to facilitate hope and wholeness, how can we change systems to really ultimately change the lives of people? So it does come from a really authentic spiritual formation that I've had all my life, and didn't know until I got to grad school, like, oh, this all goes together. So it really is a natural, kind of a natural marriage. And that's, again, why things I do, it doesn't often feel like work. It really is just an extension of who Charles Barrett is as a person.
Man, that's spot on. I remember a few years ago, we had some gentlemen, actually it was a number of students from I want to say they were from Nigeria, but they were visiting Howard University, and they all came to the church. And they were saying that a minister of this, a minister of that, talking about their studies. And I just had to ask one of them, it's like, so I'm a student of psychology. It's like, we're ministers of psychology. And like, we don't separate. Like, this is our ministry.
Exactly
this is our work.
Exactly right.
And hearing you talk is making me think of that.
Exactly right. So I thought as a kid that my life was going towards what I would call traditional pastoral ministry. I really felt that by now I would be someone's associate pastor or a worship pastor, pastoring a church. But I realized several years ago that I pastor every single day in my schools.
Day.
Yep. Because pastoring is simply loving people and walking with people through difficult times. So
that's it.
If it was a crisis, it's supporting students and staff. If it was a teacher going through some rough times or a family, that's loving the people. And that's what I did as a school psychologist. So it might not be the traditional, I'm in a church building, but I always almost jokingly, but I also meant it that my church was my schools, because I really felt that connection and burden for the people to really be there to kind of shoulder and support them in whatever they were going through. So definitely that for me resonates strongly. And again, it goes back to this sense of calling, this sense of purpose, sense of passion that I really can't get away from whatever I'm doing. So we can talk all day about that. But yeah, that's good stuff.
It's fascinating. And the connections really is fascinating. So on another level of that, the public speaking, right? Growing up in a church. That was part of it. You're going to get up here every fourth Sunday and you got to present on something. What you've been learning up there in Sunday school, you're going to come here and present.
Exactly right. Exactly right. All of that. I mean, speaking in front of people, playing in front of crowds. I remember being, 12, 13 years old and playing in front of hundreds of people. Just kind of being in that. Now, it was easy for me because I wasn't speaking, had to stutter, but I was kind of just play. But just being able to be around people and be, it's kind of, to prepare something and to be professional. All those things I learned in church. Robert Fulghum says, I think it's everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten. For me, I learned in church.
That's
I learned about managing people in church. I learned about personalities.
We need a whole episode on that.
all of these things, before my current role, I was like a music director at a church, and that's how I learned to manage people. It was overseeing, budgets and planning for, concerts and services. All of that was administration that I also bring to my current role. So definitely church has been a central to my formation as a person, not only, my faith, but just my being, So definitely, yeah, that's a whole nother conversation, but it's good stuff.
Yeah, good stuff, good stuff. And look, I can't help but notice the shirt that you
Yes,
have
sir.
on there. And
Yes,
for
sir.
our audio listeners, if you can't see, it says "Focus on the Fence." And if you are an audio listener, hop over to our YouTube channel. We'll have the video up for you. But the shirt says "Focus on the Fence." Now, break it down. What does that mean? And where did the inspiration for that come from?
It's funny. So probably February of 2021, I was speaking to a group of leaders, I think some superintendents and other district level leaders out in Illinois or the Midwest. And we've all seen these images of the fences, and we have some people or kids on boxes, and one image shows they're all standing on one box, and the other one shows a person on no boxes, one on two, I think one on three, or this different number of boxes. And it's meant to really highlight the differences between equity and equality. And that's all fine and good. People need different things. I always say, as a short person, I'm going to need more boxes to see over the fence and to actually watch this baseball game. But someone in the audience or on the Zoom meeting highlighted that the fence is the fundamental problem, and we have to fix the fence. And I never saw that before. It was this fascinating revelation that we always focus on these individual interventions or these accommodations that we give people based on, their differences. But really, if we didn't have the fence to begin with, those boxes become irrelevant. So some other images show justice being kind of a wire fence with holes into it, but then true liberation is actually removing the fence altogether. So I started blogging. So if you go to charlesbarrett.org and then click on, there's a page called Focus on the Fence, you'll see some blogs there I've been writing about. And my focus now, through a lens of social justice, is what are the systemic barriers that are impeding opportunity and access. So yes, the work of an individual psychologist, individual teacher, individual principals in their buildings, that's wonderful, that's necessary. But how can we have more significant and more systemic changes, looking at school funding, looking at community violence, looking at poverty, looking at a whole host of factors that ultimately affect kids in school. So never being a policy guy, that was never my focus, never my interest. But now I'm seeing, to really change things, we have to change systems. And we can't talk about social justice without talking about the systems in place that really marginalize people. So that's been my latest kind of project or focus, is thinking about what are the fences that exist, and how can we deconstruct those. I've said that fences are constructed, or they're made by people, and because they are constructed, they can also be deconstructed. But it takes, people, to do that. So who do we influence, be it school board, be it, local politicians, governors, city council, board of supervisors, or mayor, whoever that is, because that's where the real work is changing the system. Even now in this COVID era, coming back to school, I'm thinking about the whole host of kids who are having difficulties with behavior, with aggression, with mental health. And the unfortunate thing is, many sites I talk to, not even in my own school district, but just across the country, is everybody is overwhelmed with these referrals. Test the kid for this, test the kid for autism, test the kid for ED and other things. Not to say that some kids don't have a legitimate disability, but what we have is a system that has all or most of the allocation of resources in special education. And the only way to access that is to have a disability. What we need to be doing is reallocating those funds to the general education environment and serving kids through gen ed. So that's one example of a fence that needs to be modified, deconstructed, abolished, whatever word you want to use, because it's not helpful for kids. So broadly, it's my slogan of just thinking about what are the systemic challenges, systemic barriers that play out in kids' lives. How can we focus on those things to be more effective?
And Charles, one thing as you were speaking that kind of popped in my mind is the Barrett household is really about that action. Now, your wife, she's in policy. Sir. Is that correct?
She is. So right now she is policy. I'm not sure of her exact title, but she works for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund as I think it's their national policy director. So she's always been a policy person. So hearing her conversation, I'll be very honest, hearing about what she does, she worked with adults all day. And that wasn't my thing. I like kids. I like testing kids. I like being in classrooms, working with teachers. But I'm learning through her work and just kind of thinking more about this whole justice orientation. It really does take influencing the people who make decisions, the people who allocate funding, the people who make laws and policies. That's where the work is. So yeah, she's a lawyer by training, but she's been doing policy for probably the last 15, 16 years. I learned from her too. She's not a school psychologist, but she teaches me a lot.
Oh, absolutely. And same for me with my identical twin who I had on the first episode. And he's the director of DC Council of Racial Equity. And he's the first to lead that work. And his thing is literally reviewing policies and bills to see if they're equity. And he determines, he completes, I believe it's called a RIAS, a Racial Equity Impact Assessment.
Okay.
And through that, he's able to literally see who might this bill cause harm to, who might it disproportionately benefit. And then his office makes a recommendation on if this bill is equitable or not. And they recently reviewed a bill that looked at something within the education space. And just like that, he makes a sweeping policy change where I've been trying to do this work for years. And the power of a pen. So there's power in policy for sure.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah. So Charles, with that and looking at this from a systemic level, right? One of the things that you've worked on is the NASP Exposure project, and looking at how systemically we might get more people of color in the field of school psychology. And so I would like for you to share just a little bit about what that project is and future iterations of that work.
Sure. So you were there in the early stages and ground level of this project. A bunch of us were, I think, now that might have been NASP in, I want to say Chicago. I
was definitely Chicago, yeah.
And we were talking about just how do we get more Black people in school psychology, Black students to become Black school psychologists. And Tiara Bland, when I mentioned Tiara Bland, because she was doing some work on this before that, and basically it's about telling people who we are. Almost everywhere I go, I ask people, how many of us stumbled upon the field? And like me, didn't know about it until I was a senior. Almost everyone says, yeah, I happened to know somebody, happened to meet someone. I Googled it. Very few people really knew what school psych was and pursued school psychology, from the time they were in high school or undergrad. So this project is very simple. It's designed to expose, to introduce high school students and undergrads to school psychology with a focus on racially and ethnically minoritized individuals. So a couple states in particular, Texas is one, has been pushing this project in their HBCUs throughout Texas. But we really want people to know about the field, especially because children and families are representing more and more backgrounds. And the field right now is overwhelmingly white and female. And we want our school psychologists to really represent the families, the students that we serve. So how can we just simply tell people that we exist as school psychologists? What's encouraging, we're now in year 4, phase 7, and we are well over 23,000 people exposed to the field in a couple years. So we're doing great. What's encouraging is that there are students who heard about school psych as undergrads through these presentations and are now in school psych programs. So it's working, it's exciting. I think the next wave of this is really focusing on, again, those fences. So now that we have people interested in the field, what does funding look like? What does the acceptance rate look like? And then also, what does the actual climate of the program look like? So I think that we have to be careful about inviting people into a field and then doing harm when they're not treated, well in their graduate program. So I think that it's multifaceted. There are people who are leaving the field for various reasons. So I want to look at how can we ensure that programs are welcoming, are inclusive, are inviting to all students, but especially students of color who may be interested and may have learned about the field through the Exposure Project. So again, if you go to my Instagram, and I think my Twitter, there's a link tree. There's a link in there that takes you to the materials. If you're a school psychologist, if you're in a school psych training program, you are qualified to do this. We want you to present to a school, to a university, in your community, even virtually. Our goal is every school psych, every faculty, every practitioner, one time per semester. That would help us tremendously. So very excited about that. It'll be around for years. I'm excited to see where we get this semester. We end every September to December is one phase, and then January through June, the next phase. So I think right now my last update was like 3,500 we got this semester alone. So we're doing great, but definitely it is to address, shortages, but definitely also to increase the number of racially and ethnically minoritized psychs in the field as well.
That's really sensational work, and I'm happy that you are prioritizing this and see the need for it and are doing something about it under your leadership.
It's important.
Yeah, and I had on one of the previous episodes Kendall Kelly, a graduate student.
Kendall Kelly, yeah, good brother, yeah.
Yeah, good brother. Graduate student in a doc program at Texas Women's, and he collaborated with a professor of education at Bowie State University, and they recently released an article specifically niching down from the work that you've been doing, looking at black males in the field of school psychology. It's very specific. Yeah, they're really helping to propel it from that research angle and looking to increase more of us. What was interesting, he said that he was able to find a statistic that showed that there's 0.4% of black males in the field of school psychology. So
I think when I was in grad school, I saw a 0.2% was where we were. Wow, 0.4.
Whew. Yeah. So it really puts in perspective. And taking it a step further, he said that you have a higher likelihood of playing in the NFL as a black male than becoming a school psychologist.
Correct.
So it puts in perspective the work that you're doing and why it's so important, man.
It's important. It really is. And it's, again, there's so many factors that are involved. One thing, actually, Kendall and I were talking in Texas a couple weeks ago, and one of the realities of school psych is that it's also an expensive program and the things you need to get through. So, for example, most people, you need a car to go to practicum, to, test children. So those types of privileges, if you will, are not always accessible to everyone. The commitment to go to school full time, although there are part-time programs, just many things that make school psych a little different than other graduate programs that does place a burden on those of us who may not come from family support systems, financially at least, to make it more feasible. So that's where I think fences of opportunity and access, funding can be very beneficial to really make some changes in our demographics.
Focus on the fence.
Gotta do it.
That's it. Gotta do it. Charles, so as we wrap up, man, you're a musician, right?
Yes, sir.
An artist.
Yes.
And I know you're sensitive about your stuff. So I would like to know if you could perform with any artist, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
That's a hard question, man. I'm thinking about three people that come to mind immediately. One is no longer with us. So on the gospel front, hands down, my favorite artist was Walter Hawkins. I thought Walter Hawkins could sing, his writing impeccable. So Walter, I think, passed back in maybe 2010. So if he was around, hands down, Walter Hawkins is one of my all-time favorites. Going back to like end of college, early grad school, Jill Scott is one of my all-time favorites.
Yes,
Jill Scott. That first project, Who is Jill Scott, is perfection. It's perfection. So if I could play with Jill Scott, that would probably be my current artist. And I gotta mention one more person. So I've been watching this guy, gotta be 25 years. His name is Jason White. And Jason White is the producer, the musical mastermind behind Kanye West's Sunday Service. And Jason, master musician, keyboardist, organist from LA. I've been watching Jason White his entire career. So as a producer, as an arranger, as a musician, can't get much better than Jason White. So if I can work with Jason White, Jill Scott, and Walter Hawkins, I'll be a happy man.
That's a really solid list. I didn't expect you to say Jill Scott. So Jill Scott is hands down my favorite singer.
Jill Scott
is her voice unmatched to me. Yeah,
that she has a nationwide commercial now, and just her. She's singing probably 30 seconds, but it's perfect. So yeah, Jill Scott, Jason White. So at this point, I'm more of a writer than an artist. Well, I'm an artist, but not like performing, I guess. But if one of my songs gets to Jason White to produce, I'll be all right.
We're gonna speak it into existence.
That's exactly right. Between Jason and Jill and Miss Oprah, all of it.
Yeah,
exactly right.
Good stuff. So a couple more questions that I didn't prep you for, but just gonna throw it out there.
Sure.
Coke or ginger ale?
Ginger ale all the way, brother. Not even a comparison. And it must be Canada Dry in a can. No bottle, no tulip. I have, at all times, I have my Canada Dry ginger ale, cold or warm. That's the only soda I can drink cold or warm. But yeah, I am a ginger ale, I'm a Canada Dry man, for sure.
Awesome. And last question. What is the greatest movie of all time?
Byron McClure, the greatest movie of all time, Oscar-worthy, is the original Home Alone.
There it is.
Home Alone. I can watch Home Alone as if it's the first time I saw it in the middle of July. That is my movie. Actually, we're almost in Home Alone season today, at least when we're recording this. But I'll be watching Home Alone a whole lot between Thanksgiving and New Year's. That is my movie.
What is it about Home Alone?
I like the innocence of Kevin, the character Kevin McAllister. I think it's funny. I just like the whole innocence of this kid outsmarting two adults and just defending, his house. I don't know how I got there, but I love that movie. There's one line to me that's funny. I think the best line in the movie for me is early in the movie he says, "When I grow up and get married, I'm living alone." And I thought, how are you married and living by yourself? But just again, the innocence of what he's saying. I think he's 8 or 9 years old in the movie. But yeah, I just love it's my favorite holiday of all time is always Christmas. I mean, I just love the holiday season. I love Christmas. So the whole Christmas theme, the happy ending, is perfect. I love it.
Good stuff.
That's my movie. Yeah.
Holiday season, where to catch Charles.
Absolutely.
On the couch, Home Alone on the screen with a ginger ale.
That's
in hand. Yeah, good stuff. Any closing thoughts, my good brother?
No, man. Thanks for having me. I tell you to always, via text, privately, call. You're doing phenomenal work, brother. Really, keep it up. You're helping kids. It's authentic. It's genuine, but it's effective. So good stuff. Thanks for having me. Honored to be here on the podcast, and keep doing great things.
Thank you, as always, man. It really is my pleasure. I wanted to get you on for selfish reasons. Like I said, man, you know, what's bizarre is people will message me and after a session, or they'll talk to me like, you know, I follow your work. I look up to you. Like, you're doing great work. And I'm like, that's cool. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm humble, right? But in my mind, that's how I envision you. That's how I envision Sherry, the Scott Great, like all of those people. So it's cool, you know. And I try to emulate the work that you all are doing and make sure that I'm uplifting some of those younger students and early career practitioners as well.
I appreciate that. Absolutely.
Yeah. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so Twitter is @_Charles Barrett. And then Instagram @Charles A. Barrett. And then the website, charlesbarrett.org. You can email me from there. Check out the app, too. Charles Barrett app, totally free. Google Play, App Store. Just type in Charles Barrett. You can get that as well. So love to engage with you online, email, website. Never a problem.
All right, y'all. And as always, you see I got his book on the shelf. It's always about the children. I'll continue screaming that. Thank you for this healing-centered conversation. Thanks for tuning in to the podcast. Be sure to follow @HealingConvoPod across all social media platforms. Help us grow by liking, sharing, commenting, and leaving a positive review. Tell a friend to tell a friend about the Healing Centered Conversations podcast. Until next time.